I am delighted to be here at this conference with this distinguished group of people from all over the world. So I'd officially like to thank IAFOR for inviting me. I have to give special thanks to Professor Oford, who has hosted me at conferences in Australia, and also to Dr. Sue Balin, who has hosted me at prior conferences here in Barcelona. Also, I've been emailing back and forth with Kiyoshi Mana, and he and the staff of IAFOR have been just very, very supportive in enabling me to be here. This is a historic day to be having this conference as well. As we know, July 14th is the French national holiday, La Fête Nationale, which in English we call Bastille Day. This day would be important no matter what. It happens to be of great interest since my country's current leader is in Paris to participate or watch the events that are taking place, which I understand includes a giant military parade. I'm kind of scared what might happen when he goes back home, and if he'll decide we need to have a similar kind of parade. It's also a very historic time, as the recent shifts in national governance have had and are going to continue to have profound regional and international consequences for the entire globe. Everyone asked me what's going to be happening in the United States. Nobody could answer that question from minute to minute, tweet to tweet, as to what might happen. Your guess literally is as good as anyone in the United States. But as we're using this metaphor of the ride, we could be in for a really rough ride. We may not even have really gotten started in how rocky the ride may be. I'm delighted to have been asked to be the opening keynoter for this conference for several reasons. In this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on gender, and in my 35-year career as an international lawyer, 30 years of which has been as a law professor, I have found that gender is usually a subordinated topic within a big conference unless you're at a gender conference. I'm also going to be talking about race and ethnicity, which are also potentially subordinated themes unless the entire conference is on those subjects. So I salute this organization for placing these topics at the forefront of the conference by having this opening keynote. Even more rare, I focus on the situation of women of color around the world, whether they be minorities in their own country, such as I am an African American and a minority within the United States, or they are the majority of a population where they may be in the majority ethnic, racial, religious, or other group, but no matter what their status, their needs are marginalized within their particular societies. So, not to mention their needs often being eliminated or ignored totally if you have a conference on either gender, race, or any other related topic. So I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of something called critical race feminism, which is the title of a couple of the readers that I have edited. And critical race feminism. Is there anybody in here beside Dr. Oford who has heard of critical race feminism? Oh, a couple of people. Okay, good. So critical race feminism looks at the legal status of women around the world, women of color around the world. These women are precariously situated at the bottom of every society, economically, educationally, socially, politically. And I know is there anybody else that's a lawyer in the room? No. Okay, so I am an ambassador from the legal profession to show you a little bit about what we've been doing, predominantly in the United States, but also there are critters or critical race people in other countries as well. In critical race, we use the narrative approach, which has been attacked by many as not being sufficiently theoretical, scholarly, etc. Nevertheless, we use the narrative to help relate. As was stated, it's a big difference to hear a real story versus just reading about it in a book. So I'm going to open with telling you a little story about how is it that I, as an African American female, became involved with the Middle East, for instance. It's not really a logical connection. And it's been a great part of my work over the last 35 years. I became involved in this topic because of love. Not love of the Middle East, I knew nothing about it. Not love of Arabic, I had no exposure. I used to be in love with this man. His name was Rico, and we were married. And he decided in the summer of 1982, just after receiving his medical school degree, that he would go over to the Middle East and volunteer during the war in Beirut. This was a war where Israel was bombing Beirut. I had left the country. I was in Europe with my mother. This is before the internet. I didn't even know he'd left the country. Anyway, he meets me. We were going to go to South Africa, not South Africa, Mozambique. And he says, well, I'm not going. I said, like, why? We're in Portugal. He's like, well, you know, I've heard this speech and they need medical volunteers and I have a brand new medical degree. And I said, you're right, you know, but it's dangerous there. He says, yes, I know. We were young and in love. You all remember that? Well, some of you actually are young. But those of you who are older, you remember what it's like to be young and in love. And so we went off to the war zone. It's like the movie Reds. We get there. We're put into a hospital, and it's a Palestinian hospital. I didn't know Palestinians had hospitals. I didn't know anything about them. Literally, I knew nothing about them. We worked there for a month during this war. Our hospital was hit about 6 times. And many people that I know and met and worked with, I was made an administrator, were injured. Some were killed, and so forth. So then it was time to come back to the U.S. And we were getting ready to go, and before I was leaving, I brought some food over to one of the ladies there, and she was digging in the rubble, and she said, this used to be my house, this apartment house, and you've given me this food, and I'm trying to find something. So she found some Chiclets gum in like a little candy dish. She said, this is from my house in this rubble. I want you to have this from me because I'm so grateful you came here to help us. You can imagine, this woman had nothing, and she was giving me what she had. I had never experienced such a feeling. And it was on that day I became a Palestinian mother, relating to this Palestinian mother. Today I have 7 children. I have 14 grandchildren, with number 15 coming in August. And I have never forgotten that personal experience. And when we got back to America, and a massacre had taken place right where we had just left, in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camp, the Gaza hospital. And if you know anything about Palestine, I don't know if any of you do, and there's been many horrible massacres. That particular massacre of September 1982 is one of the unfortunate lowlights or highlights of their history. And we just happened to have to come back to America. If I had stayed 2 more days, I wouldn't be in front of you right now. And because we survived, because we were able to come back to the United States with our global privilege and speak at the United Nations about who were those Palestinians and Lebanese who were killed, I decided I would make part of my career talking about the Middle East, talking about the Palestinian situation. And to this moment, that initial experience guides me in what I do. and I had to become self-taught and learning about Middle East studies, etc. And that is how I, as an African American, got involved with this topic. And whenever I'm speaking, like today, and I am bringing up the plight of women from this region, women who are now, some of them refugees in Europe or America or wherever they are in the world, people who you don't know their name, you don't know their faces, I think of those people. So fast forward 20 years, okay? By this point, I'm a professor at the University of Iowa. By the way, I went to Iowa from New York following that same husband, and we were only going to stay there 2 years and then go back to civilization in New York or LA, something like this. So here I am. 20 years later, I was there, and I became a Muslim mother. I ended up adopting 2 Ethiopian young ladies who were refugees, asylees, who had come from Ethiopia to Kenya, and then with their mom, they came to Iowa. One of their siblings had gotten to Iowa, and then their mom vanished. We have not seen or heard from her since 1999. We don't know what happened. You never hear about this part. We don't know if she's dead. We don't know if she's alive. We don't know if she's in a mental breakdown. We have no idea. How many people are like that? But those girls needed mothering. And my boss, his wife was a social worker. She said, Adrien, I know you specialize in Africa. Can you help me with these girls? And I became a Muslim mother, an Ethiopian mother. And now those girls have a number of children as well. So they represent an American success story. They came as refugees, asylees, but in a couple of different ways. One of them had learning disabilities. She barely got out of high school. She does work in a nursing home and cleans people, empties their bedpans. She went back to Ethiopia, met a guy, married him, brings him to America, has gotten citizenship for him, his family, etc. They have a house through organization Habitat for Humanity. And, their income level is low, but they represent an American dream. But there's lots of issues. Other members of their family can't get visas to get in the country. We don't know what's going to happen now since the new administration came in. People who are in the process of either coming in the country or trying to get their papers fixed. We don't know what's going to happen with any of those family members, right? And they consider me part of their family. The other sister was an excellent student, went to Grinnell College, is now in medical school. She decided a number of years ago to wear hijab, to start wearing a headscarf. And her life has been a living hell with the headscarf because even her fellow medical school classmates have called her every kind of bad name, racist, sexist, Islamophobic terminology. She married an Egyptian. He has a beard. People say, aha, you look like Osama bin Laden. They look at her. They have a little child. The little child has to be watched by his parents because her husband's in residency, she's in med school, so they don't get to see their child at all. So even though eventually they are both going to be these globally privileged, well-earning doctors, up to now, they're still in a different type of struggle, a privileged struggle. But we couldn't even go away during the Christmas holiday because we were afraid we're going to be attacked. And that was before the new administration came in. Now, there's no doubt we don't dare take a vacation. We'd like to take some vacation this summer because these forces of reaction feel no hesitation to attack a woman in a headscarf. They may not know what her husband is, but they know what she is, and her with him, he looking like an Osama bin Laden, they're under even more threat. So in other words, I live things that started out of war, out of pain. And even though I publish all these articles and do these things, for me, it's most important for those of us who are globally privileged, as everyone is in this room who could even be here to have time to focus, to use some of your time and your energy and your resources to assist people in a way much more personally than you may have thought. Now, there's many, many wonderful causes around the world, and everybody will have their causes, but often people haven't thought creatively about what is it that I could do to help people of color, to help women of color, to help refugees, whether in my country or another, make an adjustment. I was impressed by Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau has a program, and they assign the asylees or refugees to be assisted by Canadian families. You all heard about this? And they host them for like, I don't know, 6 months. So then the time runs out, and then what's going to happen? And they covered this in the New York Times, and I was like, well, you know, that's a nice start, but I've been dealing with my daughters for 18 years, and it's still a lot of effort to assist them in the full transition into American society. So the idea you can plop someone who's had incredible spirit injury, incredible emotional damage, drop them in a country after 6 months and say, okay, now be a Canadian, now be an American, everything's going to be fine. It doesn't work like that. It really does take the global village of all of us to say, how will we help those who are most precariously situated? So in critical race feminism, we emphasize not only the theory, not only the pedagogy of assisting, but also the praxis of figuring out how can we concretely improve the status of women who are in this situation. And we try to do that not by coming just from the privileged position of an academic, but also, in the words of Mari Matsuda, who is one of our founders of critical race feminism, by looking to the bottom. Let me go and speak with other mothers in the refugee camp. What is it you need? Rather than me tell them what you really need is a campaign against female genital surgery. I know you need that. Any survey of people in a refugee camp will tell you out of 20 things that they're concerned about, that particular topic might not be in the top 20. It might be in a list, but not in the top 20. But with our Western arrogance, we often don't even think we should ask or talk with, or much less include in the formation of whatever we're doing, things that will assist directly. So we very much, as critical race feminists, believe we must be on the front line with our sisters, whether they be in a refugee camp or whether they be in a detention center, whether they be in a prison cell, whether they just be in a community where they don't speak the language and it's not clear how they're going to fit in, that we must talk directly with them about how can we assist you in using, in our case, the legal infrastructure in our country to improve your status. So we, in order to do that, we try to look at them not as an essentialized female, right? Okay, I know you need help to become a doctor, right? Everyone needs help to become a doctor. No, but as looking at their different identities that they may have that need to be engaged. And so just to give you some example, as you heard, I worked on the South African Constitution. I worked on it for a number of years, 4 years, and in its equality clause, rather than just a narrow view of equality as we have in the United States that looks at race and color, the South African Constitution has the following identities that critical race feminists believe. All of these identities need to be looked at, okay? So imagine the Constitution, and none of you in here, unless you're from South Africa, there's some people here from South Africa, right? Those from South Africa are familiar with this Constitution, right? So imagine most of you weren't really active when I was working on this in the 90s, but they have in their Constitution race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscious belief, culture, language, and birth. All of those statuses. And as part of the formulation, the idea was not just look at your gender or your race, but to look at race gender. To look at, for instance, women of color who might be lesbians, who are single parents, who are disabled, who are poor, who are from a minority ethnic group. That kind of intersection. And even that Constitution, which I continue to believe with most people in the world that that's the most advanced Constitution in the world, even that Constitution's equality clause does not mention class, parental status, nationality, or a status that I have written on called stature. Your stature identity is how you look within your society. And in every society of the world, if you look whatever's considered beautiful or handsome, you will do better. Every study shows the kids are treated better, they get better jobs, they get, many more advantages. So your stature identity is another aspect of how you may be viewed, how women may be viewed in particular, where how they look often is more important than what they say. So I can't stand, they'll say, well, the first lady had on this dress from whoever, Givenchy or whoever, and they don't say, and the president's suit from Brioni was particularly wondrous. They don't do that with men generally, very rarely. And yet women's stature identity, which isn't even concretized, may be holding them back. So the headscarf, for instance, something that my daughter wears, is part of her stature identity. And if she didn't wear that, her sister doesn't wear one, her whole world might be differently. So critical race feminists would say, okay, if we want to help people, we have to have programs, we have to have laws, we have to have policies that would focus on all of that simultaneously. You say, well, that's too hard. Well, life is hard. If you're a parent, you can't say, oh, well, don't worry, I won't worry about feeding you today. Today I'm going to worry about getting the car done. No, every day the kids have to be fed, the car's got to be fixed, the lawn's got to be handled. That you've got to be able to handle the multiplicity. That life is precarious, and you don't even question that. And yet we would say, oh, well, but we can't do this if we're talking about whole groups of people. Well, of course we could. One of these bunker bombs that they dropped on Afghanistan recently, apparently the cost of that would educate all the children in the world through 12th grade. One bomb. So we can do it if we want, but it will only be done if the civil society that is represented here decides that we are going to insist on it. We are not going to let outrageous, ridiculous, fake issues prevent us from focusing on the reality of the problems that the world is facing, that women of color are facing, and yet we are letting this sort of fake news issues distract us from the real problems. So you say, how do I do that in a context that makes any sense? And that's why I call for what I call coalitional transcendence. No one group, right? No one member of the village can possibly, on their own or with one group, end the problems of world poverty or of the problems of homophobia, Islamophobia, sexism, racism, or any of the isms. But through coalition, we can do tremendous things. And you say like, oh yeah, this is an old story. This is the same story. In 1970, somebody said this. Yeah, but we haven't done it yet. We let the things that divide us prevent us from working on the things that unite us. So it could be, I have friends who are Muslim and they are also Islamophobic. Some of them are Islamophobic, some of them are not. But they would both agree, my gay friends and my Muslim friends, that we don't want to be in a police state in the United States of America. We don't want there to be a progression away from the values that we'd like our society to live up to, that they've alleged we lived up to, but haven't really for 200 years. So that will require groups that may not have worked together before to say, okay, we don't agree on every issue, I don't agree on everything, but we all can agree that the principle of democracy in a true sense, not in a democracy for privileged white men with property, but that democracy that would apply to all the people, male and female, must stand, must be something we have. And in the US, many of us weren't really worried about whether there was going to be democracy at all. It was like, okay, we got to tweak it, we got to do this and that. But now, believe me, many people in the US are worried about, can there be democracy in the true sense of what it should be in the 21st century? And so we must, in coalition, work together on a number of issues. And we can't work together if we decide that, okay, more than half the people are women, and many of them have multiple kinds of oppression, if we just exclude them. Let me just work with the elites, the other professors who know how to do a footnote. That is not going to solve everything. As much as you care about your footnotes, in law, unfortunately, they care too much about the footnotes, we cannot move forward. So coalition will be essential, right, to help those with intersectional identities that lead many of them to face oppression. All of us have intersectional identities, but it could be more of us have, this went off, but that more of us may have identities that privilege us, whereas the women I'm talking about, most of their identities cause them not to be privileged. So coalition. Now, why do I say transcendence? We have to get out of the victim mentality that, oh, we're here to help you poor people, you all are the victims, and I can help you, I can do this, where we have criticized other people for that, and yet we who are in an academy are guilty of that as well. So it's like, I've helped this poor person and now I feel good, right? I feel great because I helped them, I gave $10, I gave $50, I joined an NGO or something like that. We fail to look at everyone as a person who is empowered, as a person who is in charge or wants to be in charge of their own destiny. Instead, we're thinking, oh, I can do that for them. So it's very important, I believe, that all of us, including those of us with this level of global privilege, work on transcending, assist in helping those who are multiply oppressed, like these women, to move forward so they can participate in each society that they're in, so they can have legalized status, so they can have education and jobs and families, etc. But also, if it helps them, you know what? It's actually going to help you too. It's going to help you transcend your own unconscious racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and other phobias and isms that you have that you don't even know you have. And even though you will have achieved great things with your multiple degrees that all of you are getting and the multiple publications, it will help you transcend your narrow nationalism that you may have and your narrow ways of looking at the world to move forward in a way that all of us can transcend. And I say this not because I think, tomorrow we're going to be like the shining city on the hill and everything's going to be okay. No. As Nelson Mandela said when he was in prison for what he thought would be his life, right? It was 27 years ultimately. He said, the struggle is my life. So it's not about whether the fact that I helped write 3 constitutions means, okay, we've solved those problems now. The words on the paper are just the start. They're not even the start. They are the results of struggle that happen in societies. You get these words in the paper, and then as we see, even in the United States and Europe, it can take decades and centuries to make those words penetrate into the society to help the men and the women in the societies live up to that. But if we don't do that, if we don't say, I am committed to the struggle for life, we certainly cannot make progress. As I said, hey, I've been out here as an international lawyer 35 years. People say, that can't be. Somehow it happened. I don't know if I have till tomorrow or if I have another 20 years, but no matter how long I have, I am committed to that struggle, to using some part of my personal time, my finances, my resources in working together with my sisters and my brothers in all of the countries and areas that I'm focusing on to make a difference in their reality and in mine. And also to bring to the attention of my own society and Western society how much we have to learn from the societies that we have looked down on, that we have colonized and neo-colonized. I wrote an article about what the South African Constitution can teach the Americans. People in America are like, what do you mean? They have nothing to teach us. I said, okay, look at this list here. Do we have these things in our Constitution? No. Are they coming anytime soon? No. Well, look, imagine, we actually can learn from other societies on this planet about what democracy can mean, at least on paper and over time. So, I know my time is running. I want to close once again with the personal. When I was working on the Palestinian basic law in the 90s and the South African Constitution in the 90s, it was always like, okay, well, which society is going to get stabilized first? As we now know, well, South Africa got black majority rule. It's had 3 black presidents. It has been developing. As we also know, every day in the media is something about Palestine, and it's not good. The Palestinians are as far away today from getting their independent state, if not further away, than they were when I worked on the basic law, which was supposed to be a temporary constitution back in the 90s. Things are going to get probably a lot worse for them, certainly nothing better in a region where things are very bad. And so despite that, and despite the fact that I have global privilege and I can hop in and out of Tel Aviv, I can go to the Dome of the Rock, and then I can hop to London, and I've been to Syria, and I've been to many societies that my friends cannot go to, my Muslim friends who can't go to the Dome of the Rock, and I have to tell them as a Christian what's happening, what does the Dome of the Rock look like? Despite this problem, despite all these problems, I dream a dream. A dream, you know that idea of the dream coming from my countryman, Dr. Martin Luther King. And he had a dream back in the 60s that black children and white children would be together in Georgia and they would hold hands, etc. That dream doesn't exist for the most part in Georgia now. And if anything, it's worse than it was at the time when he was coming through. So I have a dream, since I'm a globalist. My dream is that one day, my 7 children, who are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and atheist, will be able to go to Jerusalem, along with the 15 or however many grandchildren I'll have at that point, and that they will be able, these grandchildren of mine and their parents will be able to go there, and they'll be able to have a coffee, be able to have a dinner with Israeli Jewish people and Palestinian Muslim people, and that we'll all be able to go sightseeing at Dome of the Rock and look at it just as we would look at Sagrada Familia and be able to say how beautiful, how wonderful. And I know we're far, far away from that dream, but I am committed to seeing that dream come true. And I hope all of you all will think about that as well. Thank you very much.